The weather that they lift their pots in is terrible.
Okay.
I can remember George, 2 fine days. George has gone fishing. Hello, the boat's still on the moorings. They're in the pub.
Fishing was, full on right up until, I guess, till about the mid-1980s, and then they brought in the quota system, and the decline in the population was quite obvious after the quotas were set. A lot of the fishermen didn't have enough quota to sustain their lifestyle or livelihood, and virtually sold their quota and moved off the island. I mean, when I stopped fishing in 1984, there was 60-odd commercial fishermen on Rakiura, and some of those tangata whenua. Today, I think there's eight fishermen. The man to start off the selling of the Rakiura to the Crown was old Topi Pātuki. He was one of the paramount chiefs of this area. They settled on an agreement of £6,000 for the 420,000 acres which comprised the island. And there were other chiefs from Otago and further north that agreed to the sale of it. There was certainly a deed signed to give the Crown sovereignty over the island. I understand the original price they were wanting was about 50,000, but anyway, they settled on 6. The terms of the payment was to be 2,000 up front, of which they certainly received, and was divided not quite equally amongst everybody. But anyway, the balance of it was to be 2,000 was to be a sort of for education, and I think there was another 2,000 for acquiring land and that type of thing for housing and that. But the actual amount that the Crown paid, from my understanding, was just the 2,000 up front. A lot of the obligations from the Crown weren't actually actioned. There was an exclusion in the sale of Rakiura, which was quite important, and it's the fact that the beneficial Teti Islands were never sold, or Ruapuki Island. Topi Pātuki brokered that deal that there no way was the beneficial Teti Islands negotiable, that they would stay in ownership of the tangata whenua. When the island was sold to the Crown in 1864, they set aside reserves for the iwi virtually to survive on. There was one at East Raggedy, Miteni Island, Masons Bay, Easy Harbour, and then Lords River Head, 30 acres on the headland, Port Adventure, small block there at the Kaik, the Neck, Kaipipi, south end of Horseshoe Bay, and also the south end of Maori Beach, and they were the 9 reserves. Of course, that's when all the trouble started, not enough land for anyone to live on. All of a sudden they realised after the sale, we've sold our tūringa waiwa.
The half-caste got nothing whatsoever. They were completely landless, although they were the people who lived here.
So in the duty of the Crown, they had to give them somewhere to live. So in 1873, they set up the half-caste land grant sections, mostly for the people that were living here.
8 acres per woman and 10 acres per man.
They were actually allocated at the Neck, Native Island, Bravo Island, Picaroro Point, the headland at Port William Point, and also in and around Half Moon Bay and Horseshoe Bays, and also Deep Bay and Patterson's Inlet. Those sections are now retained in the Rakiura Maori Trust, with the exception of 1 or 2 of the half-caste that were actually kept separate from the trust when it was initially formed. And then in 1906, they created another tenure of land of what they called the SIL, the South Island Landless Natives Act. The land was allocated to those people because the injustices done with their own land further up the South Island. And the Crown, in their wisdom, decided, well, we better square the ledger. So a lot of the land that was given to these people had never lived there, never resided here, big majority of them. And the land was actually allocated in the Lords River, Toitoi and Port Adventure blocks, which are under the Rakiura Maori Land Trust at the moment.
Port Adventure block, it's a huge area, 10,000 acres, extending from Ocean Beach right through to Port Adventure. There were 320 people, I think, granted sections in there, but it was never ever surveyed out, so it's still just one big lump of land. And oddly enough, it was granted to the Rangatani people, all of whom came from around Picton. A little bit further down at Lords River, 9,000 acres, surveyed out into sections. Those people were lucky. They got title to those lands. The Toitoi piece of land, that was Silna land also. I think there was something like 108 or 110 people who were entitled to land in there. But it was never ever surveyed out into sections either, so they've never ever received title.
If you look at the whole of Rakiura, 92% of the land is in the Dock Estate, Crown land. The balance of it is 6% is Maori land, which is under the Rakiura Maori Land Trust, and the other 2% is the freehold land in sections mainly around the area of Half Moon Bay, Horseshoe Bay, back to the north arm of Patterson's Inlet, the main residential area, if you like.
Lands and Survey.
Oh, Lands and Survey.
The Lands and
Brett
Survey
Yeoman.
people, yeah.
Yeah, that's, yeah.
They were really the managers of the land, Stewart Island land, but they'd handed over the Maori lands to Forest Service to manage.
Even though they issued people with permits to go hunting down there, they never actually went to visit the sites themselves to see what sort of condition they were in. Around about the mid-70s, I and several other fishermen, we used to visit Lord's River, Tikatatahi, Little Kuri, Port Adventure. At night time we would go into a place called Abraham's Bosom at Port Adventure or Oyster Cove, and maybe 3 or 4 of us would raft up. I had a boat called the St. Ronald, Manny West had a boat called the Kotahi, Sam Smith was there occasionally with the Endeavour, and these are guys that were involved in the initial setup of Rakiura Maori Land Incorporated, as was known in those days. So on our frequent trips we would go ashore and have a look and see the mess that was being created.
Yes, he came back and told us the place was absolutely stinking, that there was rubbish being left everywhere. Chainsaws were being used to carve out a camping ground out of the bush.
We knew that our families had ties to these lands, and we thought, this isn't good enough.
On those days, when they'd get out fishing and then suddenly the wind would come up, which it often does down here, they'd go ashore for a shot. But they were being met on the beach by people coming out of the bush and saying, "You can't come here, this is my patch."
Once we got ordered off the beach because there were hunters come out of the bush and wondered why we were here. We were having a great old time and the children were in the water having a swim and everything, and we out of the bush came, I think there was about 8 men with rifles and packs and demanded to know what we were doing here because they were there shooting. We had a bit of a discussion with them and told them we had a right to be up here.
As caretakers, we were caretakers of the land, we had to do something about it.
So we formed this loose body of people, and made a formal application to the Maori Land Court to have us incorporated as caretakers of the land. In essence, we wanted a say as to who went on it and set some guidelines as to what these people can and cannot do on the land. And that took place around about the mid-70s, I think from memory around about 76 or 77. And really, my younger brother, he was the brains in the whole lot as it turned out, and he knew what to say and where to say it and who to contact, and we had to get permission, I guess, from as many owners as we could contact to establish ourselves in their eyes as caretakers, and we also had to let them know what was happening with the land. A lot of these people were scattered length and breadth of the country, and of course that led to making application to the court case and eventually fronting up in front of Judge Smith in Invercargill.
Our authority actually came from being landowners here, and the judge took that into account. At the end of the hearing, the judge told us that if we were to become an incorporated society, then he would vest the Maori land in us, and that's what he did. And that's how we came into being.
The Rakiura Maori Land Trust, it's actually a collection of people who whakapapa back to Rakiura in some way. The trustees, regardless whether they live here or not, have maintained the ahi ka for the people to keep the home fires burning sort of thing on behalf of all those people that used to live here. And of course the descendants from them are some of the trustees. So the importance of holding the ahi ka status on this island by the Rakiura Maori Trust trustees is paramount. In 2004, it was decided to have the first annual general meeting of the Rakiura Maori Land Trust on Rakiura, and it was a successful hui.
The importance of that AGM was to get the owners there to show them exactly the significance of that land. to get a feeling of belonging to those lands.
I think there were 60 odd beneficiaries that day on the Stewart Island ferry. Took them down to Lords River, through hell and high water. It wasn't much of a day. But there were people who owned land there, who'd never resided here, never even seen the place before, didn't know anything about Lords River. The land's special to them. And here they are coming down to look at ancestral land for the first time, and it just blew them away. So emotional.
People registered to come on the trip from all over the place. They came as far as Australia, all over New Zealand, and they were just absolutely amazed. There was from an 87-year-old woman down to 9-year-old children that came there for the first time in their lives to see what it was about.
It was just magnificent. It was just so wonderful to think that we had at really last got there and to see it. It was just so beautiful.
We really wanted to record virtually the history of Rakiura in relation to occupation by the tangata whenua, if you like, or the early settlers. We went to Harold, our kaumātua, to guide us on this journey to compile all this very important historical information about the occupation of Rakiura and highlight just how important it is for that trust to retain the beauty and special aspects of this island for the owners and beneficiaries.
Eastabout and westabout were the main routes down to South Cape. If the wind was easterly, then you went by westabout. If it was nor'west or westerly, then you went eastabout. And the reason for that was to make use of the various tauranga waka where you could go ashore, and haul the boat ashore or haul your waka ashore. The boats would leave, say, the Bluff or Ruapuki Island and go down as far as Port Adventure, which is a good spot. Plenty of places there to shelter and to get kaimona. And from there it would be round the corner to Tikatatahi or Lords River or somewhere there, and then down to Big Kuri. But from there it was a dash right down to Pegasus. There was any amount of places there where you could shelter from any winds or any seas. On the westabout route, East Raggedy was a good place for shelter. There was a pa up here called Putatara, meaning a trumpet. The chief of the pa was Tuketi. He had moved from down at Oratahi, which is Smoky Bay. I think once he was ensconced in his pa up there, that he never moved from there because he was an enormously fat man. But at the far end of the beach there is a Maori reserve of 50 acres. It was set aside for the Aparima Maori as a stopover on their way to the Muttonbird Island. However, it was given as much use by Maori from the Bluff, so it was changed from sole use for the Aparima to use by anybody on their way to the Muttonbird Islands. We're here at Te Hapua in Mason's Bay. I was here in 1933. That was my first time in here. We only came ashore to stretch our legs. It must have been in those early days quite a populous place, and the number of skeletons, skulls and so forth that we got out of the cliffs along here. This is the general area where the tauihu or canoe prow was found. About 96, I think, it was recovered. It's now in the Invercargill Museum. We're in Easy Harbour now, right up at the top beach. This is where the Maori Reserve is up here. It's only a small reserve, but it's very steep and pretty well useless because you'd need to be a mountain goat to hang on up there, climb up those hills. The significance of the beach here, though, is that this is where the muttonbirders had a hut in which they put people who didn't want to go out and roll around all day on the Wairua or some of these boats that were picking them up.
The Wairua used to carry practically